Toby, welcome to Incremental Edge.
Thanks, Emily.
I really wanted to get you into the studio to chat about customer success because over the last 4 or 5 years at Datel, we've built customer success from an unknown concept to a ethos and a function within Datel. And when we started out, we were pretty clueless about what customer success was and how it could add value to Datel, but also to the customers that we work with.
Yeah.
And I know that when we started out, we'd have loved to have known more about it from people who had, I suppose, walked the journey that we've gone on with it. Yeah. So let's just set the scene. So we took on Sage Intacct in 2021, and that really did force us to think differently to how we previously thought about how we retain customers, how we add value to them. You know, we were selling Intacct for the first time on a subscription basis from the very start, but it also meant that we could rip up the rule book that we had as a 40-year-old business and go, right, how do we do this differently now? And I think the first part of that is, why is customer success as an approach so important to a business that relies on subscription as the revenue model for that product?
Yeah, and I would probably say the most important thing is that the lifetime value of a customer is the key metric that you're looking at. The retention becomes incredibly important. And so keeping a customer for many years so that their subscription pays you back over the long term becomes the most critical thing to the business.
Yeah.
So doing that in a really authentic way and through delivering value to the customer is really why customer success became such a big topic and a big part of what we ended up delivering at Datel.
So let's just pause and look at what life was like when we put customer success in as a function. So we had about 20 customers?
Yeah, about 20 or so customers. 4 years later, 160 customers specifically on Intacct, which in this particular space is huge amount of growth. We retain 98%. You know, we're very proud of how much we retain on a yearly basis. And of the existing customer base, we grow that base well over double digits, nearly 15% on an annual basis. And we have a huge amount of referenceability in that base as well. We have about 10% public advocacy within the base as well. So, you know, we're pretty proud of where we've got to over the last 4 years.
Yeah. And I think for me personally, you know, I'm not someone who's sat talking to customers every day, but the bit that resonated with me, that it's a mindset and an ethos before it's a role within the business.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Everybody has to buy into it from sales, you know, if you've got product teams, through product and support, and then obviously customer success as a function. It can't really exist without everybody pulling together and delivering customer success as a mindset. You know, we can look in each of those functions where customer success exists and where customer success plays a part, but, you know, it isn't a team. A team can really bind it and sort of deliver the momentum of customer success, but really it does have to be lived within the business. Otherwise, it'll all kind of start to fall apart because customer success can't do it themselves. You know, they can be the front for it and, you know, they can provide the thrust of customer success, but it does have to be a mindset.
Yeah.
Really.
So let's just pause there for a second. How would you describe customer success to someone who didn't really know what it was and what it means to a business?
Well, I think it's become a bit of a buzzword, hasn't it, over the last number of years, so 10, 15 years since it really became a big thing. And I would say personally, it's just about delivering value to customers over the long term and making sure that they're successful in using your products and services, right? So it's putting the customer at the heart of what you're doing, understanding what their measures of success are, and making sure that they are getting value out of your product and service. And that's really it in a nutshell. It doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. And yes, we put a lot of things in, we operationalize it in different ways, but really, as long as the customer is seeing value from your product and service and they are being successful whilst using it, that's all that matters.
And so where do you see or think about customer success sitting within an organization? Because obviously you sit within a customer success function, within a product function at Datel, but I see it as a lot more than that. Would you say the same?
Absolutely, yes. And the most important thing is that all of the teams within the business subscribe to the idea of customer success. And if you think about the first contact that a customer might have with you, that would be, in a lead generation environment or in a pre-sales environment. They are the first port of call to your business. So they have to understand what your customers' success metrics are, where your customers are going to derive value out of the product or service that you're offering. And then it really flows from that point all the way through onboarding, through consultancy and delivery stages. For us, that might look different for some other businesses. And then ultimately into support and aftercare. And customer success is a post-sale function, but we can't forget that it takes place in lots of other areas of the business as well. And if you deliver your own SaaS product, that has to exist in the product teams, how they develop, how they create experiences for customers to make sure that they are successful using your product and service. So, it really does have to be a full ethos throughout the whole business, throughout the whole organization, that everybody is focused on delivering outcomes, but not just outcomes, value and success for your customers.
Yeah, I was reminded recently about a process we went through actually right at the start of this. And because, Datel's an established business with a lot of established processes and ways of doing things. And what we did was we did a bit of a mind map of all the different touch points that a customer has within the organization. And we tried to, I suppose it was a bit of a SWOT analysis of like, what do we do well today and what can we add to that? And I looked at it recently, so sort of 4 years on, and it was really interesting to see where we'd adopted these different elements and who was involved. And a part of that was what are the people that touch that customer's journey and how can they add customer success value to them? Because like you say, it's not just one function, one individual. But I think that was the starting point of them working out, right, well, if we need a customer success role within the business, what does that person do alongside all these other bits and pieces?
Yeah, and so where do they fill those gaps, right? So who else in the business is going to, or what role are other people in the business going to play in the customer success journey or the customer success mindset? And then therefore, what gaps do we have and where does the customer success team sit within those gaps or fill those gaps? And it was obviously a critical exercise to be able to, for you guys to be able to, build out a job spec and to be able to explain to the incoming person what they were to be doing or the incoming team to be what they were doing. And I think it's interesting because there's a couple of ways that I see that you can embed the customer success ethos into a business. You can take kind of a top-down approach where leaders and management dictate the customer success mindset. So through messaging and through direction, through middle management and into their teams, that's one way of embedding it into the business and it can work. The other way is actually, as we did at Datel, is figure out where customer success needs to exist and then put a customer success team in the middle and then allow that mindset and that ethos to grow out of the customer success team with them sitting at the middle of it and sort of allow it to organically grow. Now, that doesn't diminish the importance of the messaging from above. Of course, it has to be supported by decision making that they're making and, marketing, doing the right messaging out to the customer base and things like that. But it was, our way was a bottom-up approach rather than a top-down approach. But I think both can work depending on which way you see that going with it.
Yeah, so obviously you stepped into this role. You were our first customer success manager. How did you work out where to start adding those processes and that would add value to the customers?
Quite honestly, there was a lot of trial and error in it to start with. I think having understood what customer success means, which is how do we add value, right? That's the most important thing. It's difficult to immediately step into a role and go, right, I'm going to add value like this in day one, but you don't have to know the answer immediately. So the first thing I did, spoke to all of our customers, understand where they get value from the product right now, where maybe we're missing the mark, look at the journey that each of those customers have gone on through sales, through onboarding and into in-life stuff, and then start to add processes around that to improve what's happened. So day one, there was no big bang. No, there was no huge processes that we put in place immediately. It was just go and talk to our customers, understand what's going on well, what's not going so well, and then start to put processes in place to fix things, make things better, add value back into businesses.
And fast forward now to sort of 4 years on, what does that look like? Are there key points that you feel have become something as a customer success approach?
Yeah, so I mean, I can't take credit for the stuff that people do in pre-sales and that marketing teams do. That, you know, they've taken that ethos and ran with it. So our first real touch point comes with people post-sale, with customers post-sale. And the first thing that I looked at was the onboarding experience. And just to be clear, onboarding it's a finite period of time, and we're talking about how does a customer go from pre-sale and once they've bought to getting that first value out of your solution. So, you know, that can sometimes be 3, 6, 9 months for bigger solutions, but it can also in some cases be minutes or hours if you're, you know, in a SaaS environment, an online SaaS environment. So for us, onboarding was the first place that we looked at and first thing that we fixed. So we made that onboarding experience clear, defined, making sure we understand what our customers' values are and what success means to all of them. And what that enables us to do is once we know the success metrics and what people class success as, that we can then make sure that we're delivering that later on down the line, right? And if we don't know that up front, how do we go and deliver that value back to somebody if we're not sure on what they class success to be? So that was the first thing that we went and fixed, is fix the onboarding experience, fix that first initial phase. And then once you understand what value is, you can then deliver that much more succinctly and easily later on down the line.
Yeah. And I think, you know, it's so interesting that in our world, that's a very high touch experience, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But actually the same principles would apply if it was a digital experience.
Oh, for sure.
Or, you know, a number of communications over different touch
think
points.
Product tours, as you buy something, as you log in for the first time, you know, we'll have all experienced that in buying some sort of online product. As you log in, product tours, you know, it's taking you around the solution, showing you how to use things. And what they're attempting to do in that is get value out of the solution as fast and as quick as possible. And that is what the onboarding experience really should be, is how do we get you from the start to first value in the quickest and shortest period of time?
Yeah. And so onboarding was really key. Any other sort of major touch points that you've enhanced over time and changed?
I mean, there's a lot that's changed over the last 4 years. As you can imagine, we had nothing and we now have a fully defined function. But I think, you know, if you take the next step along the journey, what do you do post-adoption, right? So we've taken somebody from, I haven't got something and I've bought it and we've delivered some sort of value. What's the next step? And that is getting them to adopt as many and as much of the features and functionality of your software. Or of course it can be a service, right? We shouldn't, you know, diminish service-based businesses. You can have customer success in a service-based world as well. An adoption, just to be clear, an adoption is not a finite period of time like onboarding is. So onboarding, it happens and it ends at some point, some period of time later it finishes. Adoption is an ongoing process and it should never really end. And ultimately what we're trying to do is use as much features, as many functionalities, as much of your services as possible so that become an integral part of that person's experience with you. And if we look at some of the examples in the real world, you know, we can look at people like Apple. They are great at adoption. They've got products and services that they wrap around some of their hardware, so that if you wanted to leave Apple, it's a really difficult decision to make, because I've got an iPad, I've got an iPhone, I've got AirPods, I've got Beats headphones or whatever, all part of the Apple family. So you're having to make a really tough decision to leave Apple to go somewhere else. And we can see that repeated throughout lots of different products and services. People like Sky do it really well. Every week you get an email, look at the new show that's coming out. Here's what we've released in Sky Cinema. They are trying to get you to adopt and use more features and functionalities and more, or shows in this example, and make it more integral to your life. the more that you make it integral and the more you use and the more you feel value from that product or service or business, the less likely you are to leave. And I've actually got a couple of examples of terrible adoption as well. If we think about gyms, they are great at onboarding, right? You walk through the door, you've got a great experience, they do an induction, they show you around the gym. Everybody's, excited to go in there, lose weight, get fitter. And actually the adoption process is pretty poor from that point onwards. They let you get on with it. And actually, because they do that, most people, not all, of course, but most people will start to drift away from it and stop going. And the quicker that happens, the less value people get out of it. And then, of course, what do? You start seeing the money come out of your bank. I'm actually probably going to start cancelling that gym membership. And that is the absolute opposite of what we want to do with adoption.
Yeah.
We want people to use more, get more value out of it, so that retention decision, or let's call it a retention decision, but in some cases it's not even a decision. It's just money comes out of the bank monthly. But we just want that to be a non-event.
Yeah. And I suppose, in our SaaS world, that is because they're getting value from that product that they're utilizing, that it's becoming an integral part of what they're doing.
Absolutely. And this has to be customer led, right? So we're not about ramming features down people's throats. We are enabling people to use more features and functionalities that is going to add value back to the business. So it's not about just simply using features for features' sake, or using products and services for products and services' sake. It has to be led by what the customer is trying to get out of it. So understanding their measures of success, and we talked about it briefly before, understanding what their measures of success are, and then really fitting your solution around what they want and what they need.
Yeah.
That's where they're going to get value out of it. It's not about sort of just throwing blanket features of functionality or services at people. It's about fitting those products and services and features around what they want to get out of the solution, right?
Yeah. Okay. So let's get a little more practical then. How's that look in reality with your engagement with customers as a customer success manager? What sort of things are you doing to drive that adoption and help them to get value out of a solution?
Yeah, I mean, the first things from a digital perspective, it would be release webinars, right? So it's bringing those features and functionalities that's most recently been released. Again, we're in the SaaS environment, so that's the context that we'll look at it with. So release webinars and lesser known features, webinars. So bringing that to the forefront so that people can see and understand and be made aware of that feature set. But more proactively with in a one-to-one environment is things like annual business reviews, understanding what's going on in the customer's business, and then being able to fit changes and fit new features. And we keep talking about new features. It doesn't have to be a growth perspective, right? This could just be something that they have access to but aren't using, right? It doesn't have to be new subscription, but annual business reviews, and then following that up with regular touch points throughout the year before the next one to make sure that they have adopted it, or giving them helping hands and stuff like that. So really for us, it's a very personal touch. But the reason I brought up the digital touch, because it's not personal for everybody. It can be digitally led as well. It just depends on your business and your business model specifically.
Yeah, I suppose the key is it's about understanding the audience.
Oh, absolutely.
The customers and what matters to them, and then connecting what matters to them to what value they're going to get from your product or service.
Yeah.
And reminding them of that and enhancing that over time.
It must be customer led, absolutely, because they're not going to adopt it if it's just something you're throwing at them. You don't just throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks, right? It has to be led by what they need and where they're going to get value. They're not going to get value out of something that they don't need or don't want, right? So it does have to be customer led, absolutely.
Yeah. And trust is such a massive part of that relationship, isn't it? How, in your opinion, do you build that trust with customers?
Yeah, I mean, trust is it's our lifeblood, really. If customers don't trust us, then there's no point in doing what we do. And I think if I go back 4 years and think, where did I start? We created a function, we added somebody into that role, but there was a small customer base who had never met or been introduced to customer success. So building trust with those initial customers was one of the more challenging parts of what we actually had to do. It became easier as you were introduced to customers immediately post-sale. But ultimately, it's just about showing up and continually showing up, right? So if they need something from you, if customers have a requirement or anything, it's just about being there. And relationships are all like that, right? You just have to keep showing up time and time and time again. And that's where you build the trust with people. And also not having any sort of getting anything necessarily out of each contact with customers, understanding that you're not there for your personal benefit. You're there to support and aid them, and knowing that actually that trust and that is going to be repaid later down the line.
Yeah, it'll build over time.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we talked a lot about how we set up customer success. Let's just dig a little bit into why, like the importance of customer success to a subscription business, because I think that's really key to, I suppose, building buy-in internally when you're trying to change the way we've done things before.
Yeah, I mean, for a subscription business, retention is everything, and the lifetime value of a customer is everything. We all know how much it costs to acquire customers. So we can't just let them fall out the other end, right? We've got to keep them for as long as possible. And customer success is just a mechanism for doing that. And that's where it came into being, and that's where it began its life. And that's all that we're trying to do. We're trying to keep customers for as long as we can. But we do that through the things that we've talked about, through adding value back to the business, through making sure that they're getting value in this software or for us, or the products and services that you're using. If a subscription-based business loses or has a retention rate of 85%, you will keep a customer on average for about 4 or 5 years. If that retention rate is 95%, you'll keep a customer for 10 years. So, I mean, I know 10% is a big jump, but it's doubling the life of a customer in your business. And that is absolutely critical in a subscription world. We have to keep customers for as long as we can, so that as we add new customers into the pot, we don't just let them slip out the bottom.
Yeah, and I think that's the really key bit, isn't it? This is about a business that wants to grow. They can't grow if they've got a leaky bucket, because adding more customers in will only keep them standing still.
And the flow of water is only going to continue for a certain period of time. You will always go through dry spells, right? And so that bucket, if you've got a leaky bottom, is going to start going down and down and down, right? So plug those holes so everything that you fill in the top stays. And I think, you can't grow what you can't keep. So keeping customers, growing them, and ultimately turning them into advocates is, as I said before, is the lifeblood of a subscription-based business.
So when we set out, we very intentionally put a definition around customer success, because as a business, most people didn't really know what it meant. Like you said before, it's such a buzz phrase, and you think customer success, people sort of know it relates to Salesforce and them sort of charging the way forward with customer success as a starting point. But I remember we looked at the definition for Datel of what customer success was, and we had a phrase in there of it being mutually beneficial. So adding value to customers so it's mutually beneficial to us and the customers. And I think it's important internally that people understand that it has benefit to us as a business, because then it allows us that room to add the value to the customers without worrying about, time, materials, all of that sort of thing, which is the world we've come from as a business.
I think initially when people think about customer success from within our business, it's seen as a cost center, right? In the way that support is. And yeah, you could potentially look at it like that, because you've got, you've got resources, you've got people in place that aren't necessarily revenue generators immediately. So you could look at it and say, these guys are a cost center. But actually, if you take a more long-term and more pragmatic approach and realize that the value that customer success or the customer success team are adding back into the customer base is actually keeping customers, using the example before, from taking it from 4 years to 10 years, then actually that cost of having a customer success manager becomes meaningless, right? Because the amount of revenue that you're retaining and therefore growing becomes the gratification and the payback's probably the better word for what customer success are doing. So rather than revenue targeting them up front and seeing that money come back immediately, we're seeing that over a number of years. And that can be difficult for some businesses. I understand that, it's probably £75,000 for a customer success manager by the time you've put all of the overheads on top of it, holiday and all that kind of thing. But actually, it pales in insignificance when you talk about going from 4 years to 10 years, right? Yeah. For a customer lifetime.
And I think key then is the measures of success, of customer success. And so what measures have you put in place to show that value that customer success is bringing to the business as well as to the customers?
Well, the three things I would probably say are growth, retention. Retention's the first one, so I'll say retention first, growth and advocacy.
Yeah.
And it's important to remember that those are outcomes from the work that you've done. You do not go out and directly try and retain somebody. You retain people through the correct processes and the correct behaviors and the correct ethoses and the correct work that you do with customers. You don't try and retain them, right? It becomes a byproduct of all of the stuff that you do previously. Yeah. And that is true of growth and it's true of advocacy. If you look at growth, why do customers grow? Well, customers grow because they see value in your solution or product or service, if we're not in a SaaS environment. And then they come back to get more of that because they're getting value out of it. And the same is true of advocacy or referenceability or whatever word you want to put in it, is that people say good things about your software, your product, your service because they see value in it. They don't do it because you've asked them to do it. Some people might, but we're talking about long-term sustained referenceability and advocacy, not short-term one-off referenceability or advocacy. So those three things are really a complete byproduct of everything that's happened in the previous number of interactions and years with a customer. And you will see that come back in spades when you focus on onboarding, adopting, and adding value back into businesses.
Yeah, and I think, advocacy can be a really misunderstood phrase as well. And I always come back to the fact that advocacy is really what people will say about you when you're not in the room.
What do people say behind your back, right?
Yeah. And, and obviously you can measure advocacy through public advocacy, but actually seeing that people are happy to recommend and refer others to you is a form of advocacy and can be a measure of success. And things like Trustpilot reviews, someone happy to share on a public platform that they have had a good experience is another example of advocacy. Yeah, so it's not just, I think being a marketer, advocacy can be penned into case studies and reference sites. And actually there's so many other ways in which customers can positively talk about you when you're not in the room, that then can be tracked and measured over the long term as well.
And the first thing to say is that if you're a startup SaaS business, referenceability is like the be all and end all, right? Why would somebody come and buy your product or your service from you? And that's because other people are saying good things about it. It's the only thing you have at that point in time. So you build referenceability in your customer base, and then you grow and you build further referenceability. And that's how many startups actually sort of build their customer base in the first instance. And as you were mentioning there, sort of third-party independent review sites, Trustpilot being one of them, can be a real critical way of doing that. So, you talked about case studies, and you talked about, reference sites. And, when I say referenceability, I don't necessarily mean reference sites. I mean just customers saying good things about you and, standing up what you're saying in your marketing literature. And people will read case studies and reference sites and all those kind of good things that we do. But I think personally, the real trust comes from independent sites. So the Trustpilots, the G2s, all of these kind of places where customers are saying things independently on third-party sites. That's where real trust exists, and that's where real referenceability exists. So, if you can start to turn some of those great customer stories that you're getting through your customer success teams into independent third-party reviews, then it then becomes a self-serving mechanism for the next people that are coming through the door, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think, as we're talking, I'm reflecting on the fact that this was quite a mindset shift for us as a business at every level. And if anyone's listening to this that's thinking, I've been thinking about customer success or researching it and need to move in this direction, what advice have you got for bringing others within the business on that journey with you?
I mean, it was a huge mindset shift for us, wasn't it, at Datel? And I still think to this day, we're still sort of seeing, some challenges with that, and honestly. But I think really the results for us were what helped turn opinion and mindset change. So rather than putting customer success in and then going shouting about the business and people not really understanding it or seeing the value of it and looking at it as a cost center as opposed to a revenue generator over the long term, we actually put it in place, grew something, developed a function, started seeing results, and then started shouting about those results back to the business. And then once you started seeing the results, that's where the buy-in came, and that's where people really started to see the value of what customer success was bringing.
Yeah, and I think that communication is really key to when you're making a shift in any area of your business. But with something like this, it's about explaining why back into the business, isn't it? So why it matters, why it's having the positive effect it is having, and like you say, showing examples of that. And for us, I suppose that's in customers sharing their experiences and explaining why customer success as a function or as our approach to them really adds value to what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, it was particularly challenging for us because of the history that we've had, right? And we've actually been delivering elements of customer success for 40 plus years, but we've never labeled it and we've never grown a function out of it. And therefore, we've never had something that we then shout about. So why do we now have something to shout about, and what are the results of that? And we've been doing that constantly over the last 4 years. Once we start to see the results, it may be easier for some businesses if they're smaller and they're actually starting customer success mindset immediately, because that ethos is just part of what they grow, right? As opposed to something that we put in, which didn't become, but was a little bit more modern or newer and more challenging for some people, I guess.
Everything we've touched on really reflects a very incremental approach to adopting customer success. How important do you think having a continual improvement mindset to this has helped build it to what it is?
I mean, in two ways is probably the answer to that question. So first of all, a continual improvement mindset with your customers. I'm not sure that's what you meant about it, but actually having a continual improvement mindset with your customers drives more value back into them constantly. And you should encourage your customers to have a continual improvement mindset with them. And that can be challenging, I'll not lie, but, first of all, with your customers would be a huge, huge win. But also in the role, which I think is what you were referring to, there is no big bang. You don't come out and deliver this function from scratch that's polished and that is complete. it is very much an iterative process. So you look at a part of a journey and you figure out what's not going so well there, and you figure out what's broken and what's not working well, and you put a process in place to fix it. And then when that's working well, you go to the next one in the journey and you say, what's not going so well here? And you fix it. How can we improve that process? How can we get customers to value quicker? How can we understand what's important to our customers more? It really is that simple. There doesn't have to be a huge task. It doesn't have to be this huge project that takes years and then delivering this complete and polished function. It is about making small changes, looking at processes that are broken and fixing them one by one by one by one. And over the period of 4 years for us, all of a sudden you have this very mature, not complete, absolutely not. There's never an end to it. We'll continue to improve and we'll continue to iterate, but it's about making small changes that may add up to big differences in the long run.
Yeah, and I suppose that comes down to constantly listening to customers and taking on board their feedback and what's working, what isn't, tweaking the things that aren't adding value, and continuing to do that.
Don't be afraid to ask customers for feedback. In all of our annual reviews, one of our most important topics of conversation is tell us what's going well, tell us what's not going so well, tell us what you really like, tell us what you don't like. That's what we ask. And I would say ask customers, but as you put a new process in, ask them about what they like and what they didn't like about that process as well. How do you know that you're doing it well without going and talking to them about it? And, we talked about review sites, and you're going to get, a version of the truth on there, but nothing's going to beat just going and talking to them.
Yeah. And I think actually you've touched there on what's been a pretty fundamental shift for us over this period of time, is that we've really tried to embrace feedback and listening across everything we do. So even internally with our people, improving the ways in which we listen to individuals, listen to our customers, and find ways in which we can take that on board and improve what we're doing. And it's only when you stop to think about it that you think, yeah, actually we've really tried to do that over time and change the way that we think about feedback. It's not a negative. It's there to be embraced and unlock so much more value for customers.
Without a shadow of a doubt. And so how do you know something's working or not going so well? You can have your own interpretations internally, and you can see some of those outcomes in long-term metrics, like, talk about retention. If people are leaving in droves, something's going wrong, right? So you need to change it. But the metrics can tell you a rosy picture sometimes, because sometimes the thing that's going wrong isn't shown in metrics until a lot later on down the line, right? So actually talking to people and understanding what's going well and what's not going so well, it's absolutely vital to really strive for that continuing improvement mindset.
Yeah, and understand value, because it can change customer to customer. It can change over time for customers. So without talking to them, listening to them, understanding what they need, you're going to miss that nuance and change that happens.
Yeah, for sure.
So final question I ask all my guests: what's one thing that our listeners can do today that would lead them to the kind of progress we've been talking about?
I think what I would probably say is go and pick one existing customer, just one, and whether you pick it arbitrarily or you make some sort of selection criteria is up to you. But go and pick one customer, look at their onboarding journey, look at whether you are really delivering value. And I don't mean assumed value, I mean real value. And ask yourself honestly, are we doing it? And are we doing it well? And I think if you did that, that's going to answer a lot of questions that you've had. And it's going to start to get you on the journey of going, how do we deliver value back to our customers?
Yeah, I love that. Just pick up the phone and speak to that one customer.
Yeah, it could be picking up the phone, or it could be self-reflection as well about how the journey's gone. It could be a number of ways that you do it, but pick one customer, really dig deep into what that customer went through and understand that customer's journey and whether they're really getting value out of you, the software, services, whatever. that you deliver, and that would give you a great starting point.
Thanks, Toby. That was great advice. How do people get in touch with you if they want to understand more?
LinkedIn's probably the best way, I would say. Please send me a message. I'm more happy to connect and have a chat about it in more detail. No problem at all.
Brilliant. Thank you.